Out of the wreckage of the Second World War, the newly formed United Nations attempted to establish a universal baseline for human dignity. It was an era of high optimism, built on the belief that a single set of rules could protect everyone on Earth. This document is the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Looking at Article 2, we see the foundational premise. Everyone is entitled to these rights without distinction of sex. The logic here relies on formal equality, the idea that justice means treating men and women exactly the same under the law. But early human rights treaties like this, and the later International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, left systemic patriarchal structures untouched. The text here outlines a sharp critique. Treating men and women the same under the law assumes that identical rules lead to fairness, while in reality it masks existing oppression. Think of it like a foot race where one runner starts in a deep ditch. If you give both runners the exact same stepping stool, you haven't fixed the disadvantage. You've simply preserved the gap. Applying identical, gender-neutral rules to people with vastly unequal social power only deepens that inequality. Because of this, formal equality offered an illusion of justice. It functioned as a passive shield, ignoring the structural disadvantages that crushed women before they even reached the starting line. While diplomats debated theory in the abstract halls of the UN, global feminist movements took to the streets. These activists began pointing out the places where international law simply refused to look. They exposed the public-private dichotomy. Early human rights frameworks recognized violations when they happened in public arenas, like voting booths or courthouses. But those protections vanished the moment women crossed the threshold of their own homes. Behind closed doors, physical violence, reproductive coercion, and subjugation were legally invisible. International law treated these abuses as private family matters, entirely outside the scope of human rights. Women from across the globe forced a reckoning. Through a series of UN World Conferences on Women, spanning from Mexico City all the way to Beijing, they demanded the international community acknowledge these private atrocities. Dismantling the hidden, everyday forces of patriarchy required a total restructuring of power. International law had to move past passive gender neutrality to actively confront the structures that kept women subordinated. That realization produced the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. This treaty functioned as a deliberate structural weapon of liberation, engineered to force actual real-world outcomes. CEDAW introduced a new standard, substantive equality. Instead of worrying about identical procedures, substantive equality demands equal outcomes. If historical barriers weigh women down, the system must apply unequal treatment, like quotas or temporary special measures, to achieve true balance. We see this in the treaty's text. Article 7 guarantees women the equal right to vote and participate in formulating government policy. Further down, Article 16 targets the home, mandating equal marriage and property rights to dismantle patriarchal structures limiting autonomy. But this created immediate friction. Many nations eagerly signed the treaty on the global stage, but then weaponized custom and tradition as formal reservations to protect their domestic patriarchal practices from interference. CEDAW proved that equality requires the law to aggressively rewrite culture itself. It forced nations to finally choose between upholding human rights or protecting oppressive traditions. Modifying culture was difficult, but the law still hesitated at the threshold of physical violence within the home. Domestic abuse remained effectively shielded from international accountability. That changed with the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, or DEWA. Its specific mission was to pierce the private sphere and criminalize domestic subjugation. DEWA codified the due diligence standard. This legal mechanism holds the state internationally responsible for violence committed by private actors behind closed doors. If a government fails to protect a woman from her husband, the government itself violates human rights law. It also instituted a strict prohibition on cultural justification. Under DEWA, religion, custom, and tradition can never be used as a defense for practices like marital rape or female genital penetration. For the first time in history, international law ripped away the veil of the private sphere. It declared that what happens inside the home is a public human rights violation, and the government will be made to answer for it. Yet the legal journey could not end by simply protecting women as a broad, universal category. Womanhood itself is not a single shared experience. This table breaks down the concept of intersectionality, a framework with roots stretching back to Sojourner truth. Contrasting the white feminine experience with the enslaved black woman's experience, evidence shows gender oppression is fiercely compounded by race, class, and history. Modern international law has finally begun to adopt this framework. Recent treaties formally acknowledge that a woman with a disability, or a woman from a lower caste, navigates a vastly different matrix of oppression. Modern international law applies transformative equality, a standard that targets and reconfigures the root causes of power relations in society. The progression of these legal instruments reveals an intersectional weapon designed to dismantle global patriarchy and ensure undivided human dignity.